Thank you guys for being here. This is awesome to visit this part of the country. I come from the small state of Rhode Island. And yeah, you guys got some good people, good food, and
First time.
yeah, first time to the Gulf. I am Ryan. I come from Rhode Island. I work for a facility in Rhode Island called the Inner Space Center. The Inner Space Center, I'll talk a little bit more about what they do shortly. But in terms of my background, all things communication, all things sound. Full-time job is really translating information into something people can actually feel and understand. And this comes in multiple forms of media, web, anything that comes from that realm. Collaborate with a range of partners. Some of you are actually even here today, which is cool to see. And then part-time, I'm an instructor at GSO in Rhode Island and Stanford University, all things audio, all things communications. So the Inner Space Center is an interesting place. We focus on enabling research, ocean research. We work with vessels. We put internet on ships, and then we take that data, take those streams, process them. And we have whole teams that are looking at the archival stuff. We have teams that are dedicated towards the media stuff. And then we most of the time sit there and say, well, what do we do with that? I've been there now for about 9 years. And that's a question that sometimes after every project has people shaking their head, which is what do we do with all this data? Even the experts who go out and physically have a mission to accomplish, um, we end up with terabytes and terabytes of data. And suddenly it's, well, what do we do with it? Me and my team, we take that as our role to answer that, not necessarily to define it, but to smooth that out, and really just enable the scientists to be able to think creatively of what to do with that data. So, creativity as a framework, my perspective here is going to be pretty different. Yes, I'm involved in research, but at heart, I see myself as an artist, and I think we can learn a lot through the similarities of creativity. So, creativity in these circles typically are treated as decoration and outreach for follows or things like that, like very extroverted stuff. But I see it as a connection tool personally, and I think those at the Inner Space Center would echo that sentiment, as well as most of my collaborators. And so today, I just like to share a few things and products and ideas around tapping into our creativity. And so this is a question we typically lead all projects with, which is not a question that we try to answer. It's more of a guiding principle. And if you can't read that, it is, can creativity be the key to making our work feel more human and meaningful? And that's a tough one to answer, because accessing creativity isn't something as simple as just jumping in. That requires a lot of different modes. But I'd like to talk about those different modes. Kicking it off with creativity, I would love to hear from you all. In terms of access, so what do I mean by this? Accessing your creativity. This can come in many different ways, as you can imagine. Probably happens in your personal life, or maybe it happens at your work, maybe it doesn't. But accessing your creativity, how would you do that? And I'm happy to take anyone want to be bold to answer. When you access your creativity, how you access your creativity. Yeah,
Like,
play. When do you feel at play personally?
um, at work, you break bubbles. We're doing like restoration work, so we're all covered in mud, just like blowing bubbles.
Hell yeah. So yeah, totally. That does sound fun. Yeah,
Like hanging out with my family. It like helps me, I don't know, be more creative and think of more ideas.
that's so good. It certainly is a place that we go mentally. And I don't think that's something that might seem super obvious, but I think it's just worth addressing that it is a place that we also enter and exit. There are certainly spaces which I don't feel creative. That's another talk in itself. But if we can agree that we can access our creativity in different forms or factors, um, me and my team like to focus on what we do when we enter that form or factor. So when entering creativity, typically, and this is very similar, if not the same, to a standard research philosophy, we typically start with our discovery, right? We are entering the in the woods section, new information, new data, surrounded by just too many variables. Moving into that next category will be shape. This is structure, organization, refining ideas, minimizing, and then lastly, express. And this, of course, is externalizing our ideas, shaping them for the world to be able to hold. Now, this, three-step process is something we're doing all the time. If you're out making a video about something, at one point you have to jump between these hoops. If you're writing a research paper, if you're putting together a grant, most of these stages are what allow us to be creative. The overlap, though, the overlap is connection. So, time and time again, as soon as you start to find this pattern of discover, shape, and express, you start to connect with people. You start to understand them better. And the reason this is important, an important segue into some of the topics I'll share today, is because most of our media centric work isn't approached this way. Unfortunately, if you see something that is not connecting with an audience, most of the time it's because maybe one of these stages we're missing. And it's not intentional, of course. But I'd just like to break these down just a little more from an artistic perspective. And we can look at this as, as a painter, a musician, a writer, a researcher. All of these stages are just a matter of understanding what we are dealing with. So for a painter, the discovery section might be, what colors do I have to choose from? A musician would be, what notes I have to choose from? A writer, what's my words? What's my language? And I'm sure in your worlds, you can fill in the blanks here of the different variables that apply to each category. Once we start shaping, we can mold those colors. We can pick and choose what ones we want to select and not select. Same for a musician, selecting the notes. And then that final product, the expression. This is the finished piece. It's been molded and it's been designed for an audience to hold and understand. And to me, the creative process here is no different than how we try to approach our research-centric media production work. So that brings us to, hopefully, harnessing our creativity to build connection, which hopefully can in turn make ideas into meaning. And meaning is a interesting word because I think we all can define that differently. So that's my second question for the group here is how would you describe, whether that's in your work, personally, non-personally, professionally, non-professionally, how would you describe you create that meaning? You're entering a project, you're entering a new area. How do you define meaning? An open floor.
I would just say, like connecting to others or you can like use a community.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it starts with curiosity and want to know. I think you sort of bullshit it.
Mhm. I love that. I agree. I am of the notion that meaning to me personally would be there needs to be a root to the thing, right? Like if I threw you on a project, random one that you were not passionate about. Very difficult to find meaning there. Great answers. I always just find it interesting because we define these things differently. So for my last half of this, I'd like to just go into the framework of turning information into meaning. And when talking about this, I'm only going to give examples that are media centric. There are probably hundreds and hundreds of other ways we can go about this, but I would love to just focus on the following. Authenticity, relevance, delivery, and impact. And so I'm going to start with authenticity. So when building any project, it, there comes a point where authenticity needs to be discussed. And if it's not, it usually gets put at the bottom of a page, like a line item that doesn't matter. And so for this example here, I just wanted to show a standard project summary. You guys have probably seen hundreds of these, maybe even wrote some of them. And this is just standard across the board. And I won't bore you and read it, but it is very informative. I would describe this as informational. However, I don't feel anything when I read that. Not saying that it's a bad sentence, but I just don't feel anything. And if the goal here is to have our audiences feel something to retain it, I think there's a better way to approach that. So when looking at blocks of text in grants and paperworks, email, understanding that data tells us what happened, which is what that did. It did a good job of that. However, stories are telling us why it matters. So I'd like to zoom into that a bit and introduce a project that I'm super passionate about. In collaboration with National Geographic and the nonprofit One People, One Reef, we worked with indigenous communities in Ulithi, Micronesia, and we spent 2 months in their world. Before we sat down and got to work on a project like this, we actually met with them a year in advance over Zoom, over phone calls when they had internet. And we got to know the people of this community. And it required a lot of work, as you can imagine. So it wasn't just show up with cameras, it was show up and build trust. And that trust was built in many, many different ways. Focus groups, one-on-ones, training sessions. And if I'm being honest, they most definitely taught us more than we were going to ever teach them. And so before taking that 27-hour flight, we knew it was just going to be imperative to get to know the community before going. And not necessarily defining an end goal. Yes, the grant was a project to capture media of this indigenous community and how that they operate with their coral reefs. However, we stepped back and we got to know the characters. I'm honored to be able to show some of my friends here. These are the faces of the community we spent time with and understand their ways. And during that trip, we found ourselves listening to two different perspectives. And it's a classic one. The youth, which had this very interesting view of Ulithi. They felt as though they had that very rebellion teenage edge in them where they felt like our elders are just bullies and they tell us these scary stories and we just want to go out and do our own thing. And then you had the elders who were articulating, we're just trying to pass this knowledge down. And that's really our only goal before passing is to pass this knowledge down. So we had a bit of a story to tell there. And it was really important to us after going through those stages with them, all of those one-on-ones, like I said, 2 months in the middle of nowhere, really just digging in. It came to our attention that we should not be the ones telling that story. And when I say we, I mean the folks at Nat Geo, the folks at One People, One Reef. Yes, we were the grant writers. Yes, we were the project leads, but it was very clear that this project was too delicate to take ownership of. And so what we did was we shifted and we pivoted and we ended up just giving microphones to half of the youth, half to the elders, and had them walk around for about a month and record themselves. So that required some training, how to do that, and then just let them go. And without going too much into detail into this, that led us to a product that was produced just by them.
The podcast that echoes the vibrant voices of our youth and the wisdom of our elders. I'm Slick Lila, your host. As we explore the world of race, culture, sex, and source on the outer islands of unity atoll migration. We hope this podcast provides unique perspectives and vital conversations of the life beneath and above the waves, sharing how migration culture has thrived alongside these ecosystems from generation.
White, sandy beaches, clear water, depending on the time. Usually in the summer, it's hot and it's this calm. I would say it's pretty quiet, depending where from, probably the cities or concrete jungles. It's freedom. You have the ocean, you have the beach. It's not regulated or like the beach just belong to shooting people. It's where you consider the island. Like this is where you grow apart. This is where friendship starts. This is where relationships starts, solves that promote from the island subset.
It gives you calmness. It gives you home. It gives you peace. So even though it's hot in the new time, before go to sleep, it's good. Knowing that you have a healthy environment that you can breathe fresh air and make fresh meat for the next day.
I feel free and I feel safe to be here, especially watching all these kind of movies about the murders, and we don't have those here. We don't accidents and deals like that. Because one of the most important value that we have is the respect. Even though in the same apple, each of these brands had their own unique way of living and dealing with it. I like being an islander. I was born an islander and I wanna die an islander.
Super proud of how that came out personally, but something that really stuck with me throughout that project was not just the external piece, like us listening to it here today as listeners, but when following up with these folks, this was in 2023 and we still have our yearly Zoom calls. They went and they played these for the focus groups. And suddenly now the youth was hearing a perspective from the elders that wasn't necessarily there before we showed up, and vice versa, um, because they had the ability to record vulnerably. And then we helped obviously shape that into a conversation, as we just heard a little bit of. And so that was what stuck with me the most. Is it wasn't about getting it up on Spotify and putting logos all over it. It really was just wild to work on a project that was seriously like very humane and very cool. So yeah, that's that authenticity realm. So a question on your sheet there, when thinking about authenticity in your world, just a prompt in terms of what and how we can even interact with it. Does this invite shared meaning or center around my own perspective? And I think we should just always keep ourselves in check of that. It's an easy blind spot to have, to start creating in a silo and forget that the other perspectives are, of course, really, really important. Next up is relevance. And for this next one, I'm going to showcase a very good friend of mine, coworker, and longtime collaborator, Alex DeCiccio. Some of you might know him. He's a visual artist. He tells stories through the lens. The visual medium, photography, videography. And when Alex and I get together to work on things, it's typically ship-based live stream products. So this includes just going on a research cruise, documenting the process, going live to audiences, and having that just that interactive experience. And so this is an example of a project that's happening right now. That's why I don't have too much footage of it, because it is ongoing. But this is currently a MDBC collaboration where they are a NOAA and MDBC collaboration. We're working on the restoration and exploration of the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And so what that means is we have cameras, engineers, a whole bunch of folks on this research vessel, and they're doing this stuff, and it's awesome. And to be able to support it from shore is also another conversation in itself. However, per the topic, going into relevance, because we don't have too much footage to look at from that ongoing project, I wanted to take a look at another project that was on the same research vessel, Nancy Foster. And this one was doing some research in Hudson Canyon, a bit off of New York. And this was a 2-week mission, and it focused on documenting the expedition, exploring the canyon's unexplored ecosystems. So a lot of science. And when the team got together to look at this, it was a standard project. And what I mean by that is, as I keep bringing up, it was the last line item on the docket of the grant to say, just record video. And it's like, okay, that's fair. And we could have just did that. But I would love to show you a bit of our attempt to be more better than that.
Hello, I'm Ruth Everett. I'm the chief scientist out there on the Deep Sea Coral Research Initiative for the Northeast. We're Nancy Foster, and we're traveling to Hudson Canyon to do surveys for deep sea corals.
Something we find to work time and time again is that if we do have control over the lens, which we mainly do, and I'm talking about everyone in this room, we typically have control of foreground, background, whether it's a lens, a microphone, etc. We can choose these perspectives in which we're featuring. And so it was important to us to look at the whole cast of characters on this research vessel and make sure that there was a voice for every single one of these folks. So whether that meant the chef, whether that meant the CTD gentleman, the ROV tech, we had all of these different perspectives that we made sure to capture, not just to say we did, but because connection is made through relation. And so this next one here is, this is his first time on a cruise, so it's a great perspective.
Hi, I'm Nathan Seal. I'm a PhD student over at WSF here to help out in this voyage here. It's my first time at sea. I can say as a student, I feel as though I am the least knowledgeable and qualified person on board, but that ultimately I had so much to learn and maybe I had the most to get out of this. So I'm so excited to be up here.
That is the spirit. Last one is more of a lab tech, someone who is more hands-on, more technical.
So this is an early just educated. I, like many marine biologists, are hearing kind of just grew up in the landlocked state of Pennsylvania. And of course, for yourself, we go down shore and there's a Virginia for a period of time. And this is what I love about this outreach that you're doing, because it was through a program, a summer program for students where we got to see and marine science, where I really caught the bug to do this. And I remember a neighbor asked my sister and I, "Oh, when I think when you grow up," the most horrible question ever for a kid, but she had an answer. I said, "Well, I don't know." And then when I found out that I actually do this as a job, I was set.
Such good advice there. And, this to me is super important because it just hits home. It hits home when you can see yourself as a kid in something else. And, when that availability is not there or that's not looking at you on the other end of the screen, things just seem very unrealistic. But when you can see yourself through that lens, it certainly makes information a lot more accessible. So when people can see themselves in it, that's when it truly connects. And our question for this section, in terms of trying to navigate how do I find relevance in my work, would be whose perspectives are shaping this, and whose are missing. Second to last one here, almost done. I'd like to introduce you to another friend of mine, very talented person. Some of you may work with her, Faye Thomas, represent. Um, she's an animation artist, does a whole lot of cool things. What I'll be sharing with you today is I had the pleasure of working with her on her animated series, Coral Curiosities. And this is a Golf Reach NOAA collaboration, animated series in which they focus on the coral restoration work in multiple Gulf states, but I think the piece that makes it the most engaging in terms of delivery, as you can see, is the information has been smoothed out to a beautiful animation of characters, places, things. Yeah, I don't know. Just I geek out at this stuff because it's so cool. It's a 2D animation educational show, 4th grade to 8th grade. And it's a great example of when writing proposals or when looking at larger infrastructures, bigger projects, something like this might not sound that important at face value. But yet again, I think that's why I'm here today, is to try to just bring this awareness of what is possible. How does your information, how does your research sit with a 4th grade audience? And then how would you mold that? How would you shape that? And this was awesome. You don't see this often in our world, at least my world. And when this came along, it was so refreshing. And so I'm going to play a little bit from it. As I said, I'm in audio tech, so it was really fun to work on the voices with Faye here.
I think the first two were approved. The one that you're showing is still in your approval, so it's a privilege to see it. Quite be up.
Will give that certain minutes spots. I don't. Preto pessoa need roots. I pun stress trap. Arbeitspenses people figure na.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
So, like, when we're looking at delivery too, is looking at your audience. You didn't want to do this in silo too, could I not incorporate negotiations though. But so we had a chance to do that. The National Rhode Foundation Summit to do that. It was through the restoration months. I wanted to do something different. I always had Durban writing a book. I did not make this supervise, just my friend Kevin, but we brought a really Canadian team together. This is available on a PDF to anybody who can start fund it. On your tables, there are QR codes or just to get free books if you would still feel them more Kunde. The point that Ryan was making is that before Faye created in characters who we told her to stop, and then we went to an elementary school without should not use a they even have a voice. They just shop, they just saw the characters. And we asked them, how did the characters they begin? Would you be friends with these characters? What do you think their personality would be like? And the magical part of them was what they said is what they had envisioned. Swift was brain to me. She was a cool person and hate Albert. She was probably very smart. she can tell you cool things. Maurice, so it's sweet kids are actually both the ones as you were sort of involved. But I would say sweet taters and must so get that. But and then Maurice, they said he could probably be annoying, kind of like a little brother. And I was like, well, he's not a little brother because he's a different species, because he's a cousin. So that's what they shared with us. They're excited to see it. They were the first one before the adults to see the animated features. So we let them know that because it was for that. The book as well, we share cues with the kids. Do you like the book? Does it make sense to you? Does what Kevin wrote, do you understand what he's saying? As we talk about zones, we talk about the synthesis, we talk about what happened. They were not lying to put in tutorials and happen. So this is a new event for them that's still affecting. And also so learn the characters that are being restored, right? 10, 20 years from now, it is the first time we're going to know that the restoration hopefully is working. And so that's when May will take over with restoration. So again, it was not made just by adults. It was curated. It was given advice, and even the evaluation of what the final prize looked like, would you like to see our audience, their evaluation was for.
Thank you for that. And it was such an awesome process to be able to witness. And again, you don't see that often, and I hope it really does open the floodgates on more stuff like that. Question to ask, internal question when looking for delivery. Is this meeting the audience where they are, or is it failing to bridge that gap? Another one that I do think that often we see, unfortunately, not bridging a gap. So my last piece here is impact. And impact is a tough one. We all want impact, right? That is kind of like really important. Well, in terms of impact, I will say that what people carry with them obviously is what deepens the connection. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put up on the screen here a few of the things we already talked about. So authenticity, going back to that Micronesia project that I worked on, building credibility, making sure that you're connecting with the community, understanding that there's more than just one-dimensional science, building some sort of community around the work. Going into Alex's work, when we were getting the perspectives on the ships, making sure your work is accessible, making sure it's not just a mirror for yourself, but also a mirror for others to see themselves in that work so that they, then can join up when they're ready. And it needs to feel accessible. And then lastly, delivery with phase work. Is your information meeting the audience where they are? Have you translated the proper algorithm to the proper audience? And, wouldn't say this definitively, but historically, the projects that I've been involved in, this usually leads to impact. Impact comes from having multiple perspectives, understanding the credibility of the source, and then obviously translating for that specific audience. Thank you guys so much for having me.